The dust spiraled off the stagecoach wheels as it rolled into the small town of Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878. Nora Blackburn clutched her reticule tightly, her knuckles white against the worn leather. She'd traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston with nothing but 3 trunks of possessions and a heart full of determination that nobody in this frontier town could see. Last stop, Silver Creek. The driver called, his voice gruff from years of shouting over thundering hooves and creaking wagons. Nora stepped down onto the hard, packed dirt, her boots practical but still too fine for this dusty place, landing with a soft thud. The townsfolk didn't bother hiding their stares. Another Eastern lady come to try her hand at frontier life. They'd seen it before. 6 months, they whispered amongst themselves. She wouldn't last 6 months. Need help with those trunks, madam? A deep voice cut through her thoughts. She turned to find herself looking up at a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of summer sky. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the kind crinkles at the corners of his eyes. "Yes, thank you," she replied, straightening her back. "I'm headed to the Caldwell property." "I've purchased it through correspondence." The man's eyebrows shot up. "Old man Caldwell's place, that's 5 miles out of town, and it ain't exactly." He paused, seeming to search for a polite word, hospitable at the moment. "I'm aware of its condition, Mr. Sawyer, Keith Sawyer." He removed his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat touched by sun. "Most folks just call me Sawyer. Mr. Sawyer, I'm Nora Blackburn." She extended her hand, which he took with surprising gentleness for hands so calloused, "and I assure you I'm prepared for whatever awaits me." He chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to vibrate through the air between them. "No offense, Miss Blackburn, but I don't think anyone's prepared for that old place. Caldwell let it go to seed years before he passed. Then it's fortunate I enjoy a challenge." She nodded toward her trunks. "Now about that assistance." Keith loaded her trunks onto his wagon, noting their weight with a raised eyebrow. "Books," she explained. "I couldn't leave them behind." As they set off, Silver Creek's buildings growing smaller behind them, Keith cast sideways glances at his passenger. She sat straight-backed beside him, her chin lifted against the wind that tugged at her carefully pinned hair. "Mind if I ask what brings a Boston lady to Wyoming?" he asked, guiding the horses around a rut in the dirt road. "How did you know I'm from Boston? Your accent faint, but it's there." Nora smiled slightly. "I came for a new beginning. My father passed last year and there was nothing left for me there." "I'm sorry for your loss," Keith said, and meant it. "Thank you." She turned to look at the sweeping landscape, the distant mountains purple against the sky. "My father was a physician. I assisted him for years. I plan to continue his work here." Keith nearly pulled the wagon to a stop. "A lady doctor in Silver Creek." "A nurse," she corrected, "though I've had more training than most." "I understand frontier towns aren't often blessed with proper medical care." Keith whistled low. "That's God's truth. Nearest doctor's in Cheyenne, 2 days' ride. We make do with Mrs. Holloway's herbs and prayer." The rest of the journey passed with Keith pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area. With each mile, Nora's shoulders relaxed incrementally, though her eyes widened when they finally approached the Caldwell property. "You weren't exaggerating," she murmured. The small cabin leaned slightly, its porch sagging like a tired horse. The barn behind it looked sturdy enough, but the corral fence had several gaps where boards had fallen away. Weeds had overtaken what might once have been a garden. "Told you," Keith said, pulling the wagon to a stop. "It needs work." "Yes," Nora agreed, but there was no dismay in her voice, only assessment. "But it has good bones." Keith helped her down, their hands touching briefly. "You planning on fixing this all yourself?" "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Sawyer." Her green eyes met his, challenging. "I don't doubt that," he said, and found he meant it. "But even the strongest person needs neighbors out here. Winters are harsh and trouble comes in all seasons. Are you offering to be my neighbor, Mr. Sawyer?" He smiled, gesturing to a rise about a half-mile distant where a larger homestead stood. "Already that's my place there." For the first time since they'd met, uncertainty flickered across her face. "I see. I'll help you get settled," Keith said, already unloading a trunk. "Then I'll come by tomorrow to show you what needs fixing first." "I didn't ask for your help," Nora said, though her voice held no real resistance. "Out here, you don't have to ask." He set the trunk on the porch. "That's just how it is." As the sun began to set, Keith had helped Nora bring in her trunks, checked the cabin for unwanted animal residents, and made sure the well pump was working. The inside of the cabin was dusty but surprisingly sound. One main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to that could serve as a kitchen or workspace. "It'll do," Nora said, more to herself than to Keith. "It could be a good place," he agreed. "With work. Thank you for your help, Mr. Sawyer." He nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll be back tomorrow with some supplies. You got food for tonight?" "I do." She gestured to a basket she'd brought on the stagecoach. "All right then." He hesitated at the door. "Lock this behind me. You've got a rifle in my trunk." His eyebrows rose again. "You know how to use it." Her smile was small but confident. "My father believed in being prepared." "Smart man." Keith stepped onto the porch. "Good night, Miss Blackburn. Good night, Mr. Sawyer." As he rode away, Keith glanced back to see her silhouette in the doorway, backlit by the lantern she'd lit. Something stirred in him, an unfamiliar feeling of admiration mixed with concern. She wouldn't last 6 months, the town would say. But Keith had a feeling Nora Blackburn would surprise them all. True to his word, Keith returned the next morning with lumber, tools, and food supplies. He found Nora already outside, her hair tied back with a simple ribbon, wearing a practical work dress with the sleeves rolled up as she attempted to clear the overgrown garden. "Morning," he called, jumping down from his wagon. She straightened, wiping her brow with her forearm. "Mr. Sawyer." "You're prompt," Keith, he corrected. "If we're going to be neighbors, might as well use my given name." She nodded after a moment. "Keith, then, and I'm Nora." Over the next several weeks, a routine developed. Keith would arrive early, often bringing something needed: hinges for a door, glass for a broken window, seeds for the garden. Together they worked on making the cabin livable. He taught her how to replace rotted boards on the porch, how to mend the corral fence, and how to tell when a storm was coming by the way the wind shifted. In return, Nora shared her knowledge of medicine, showing him how certain local plants could be used for healing, and once treating a nasty cut on his hand with such gentle efficiency that he hardly felt the sting of the antiseptic. Word spread through Silver Creek about the Eastern lady living alone at the old Caldwell place. Curiosity brought visitors, women first, cautiously friendly, bearing pies and questions. They left impressed by Nora's knowledge and her willingness to help with their various ailments. "Mrs. Fulton says you fixed her boy's fever," Keith mentioned one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. "A cool bath and willow bark tea," Nora said. "Nothing miraculous," seemed like a miracle to her. Keith sipped the coffee Nora had made. "Town's starting to talk." "Oh," she tensed slightly beside him, "about how maybe you'll stay after all." He glanced at her profile, admiring the determined set of her jaw. "Though some are still betting against you. And what do you think, Keith Sawyer?" She asked, turning to face him. "I think you're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he said with a smile. "And that's saying something in these parts." She laughed, a sound he'd come to treasure. "A quality trait in a frontier nurse, I should think." "In anyone who wants to survive out here," he agreed. As summer progressed into fall, Nora's place in the community grew more secure. She'd proven herself not just with her medical skills, but with her resilience. The cabin now stood straight, with a thriving garden beside it and chickens clucking in a coop Keith had helped her build. But it wasn't all smooth progress. One afternoon in late September, Keith arrived to find Nora sitting on her porch steps, her face in her hands. "Nora." He was at her side instantly, heart pounding with worry. "What's happened?" She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "The Tanner boy, I couldn't," her voice broke. "The fever was too advanced when they brought him to me." Keith sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "Johnny Tanner." He'd been sick for days before his pa would allow his ma to fetch help. "I should have known sooner. I should have checked on the outlying families." "You can't be everywhere," Keith said gently. "And Tanner's a proud man, wouldn't have accepted help until it was too late anyway." A child died, Keith. Her voice was hollow. Yes, he said simply, and it's a terrible thing, but out here, death comes. You do what you can to push it back, but sometimes it wins anyway. They sat in silence as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I don't know if I can do this, Nora whispered finally. Keith took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. You can, you are. She looked at him then, really looked, and something passed between them that neither was ready to name. The first snow came early that year, dusting the mountains in October and reaching the valley by early November. Keith found himself at Nora's cabin more often, ensuring she had enough firewood, teaching her to recognize the signs of an approaching blizzard. The ranch keeps me busy, he explained one evening as they shared a meal at her table, but I've got good hands who can manage if I need to check on you during a storm. I appreciate your concern, Nora said, but I'm becoming quite capable, don't you think? More than capable, he agreed. But winter's different. Even the most experienced ranchers don't face it alone if they can help it. She studied him across the table, her eyes thoughtful. Why did you help me, Keith? From the very beginning, he considered his answer carefully, because you looked like you needed it. Then because I admired your determination. Now, he hesitated. Now, she prompted. Now I can't imagine not helping you, he admitted. You've become important to me, Nora. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. You've become important to me too, she said softly. Their relationship shifted after that night, a new awareness between them that manifested in lingering looks and touches that were no longer strictly practical. Yet neither rushed to define what was growing between them. December brought the first true test of Nora's resolve. A blizzard swept down from the mountains with frightening speed, trapping her in the cabin for 3 days. When Keith finally managed to reach her, breaking through snowdrifts with his strongest horse, he found her calmly reading by the fire, her supplies well managed, the cabin warm and secure. I told you I'd be fine, she said, but the relief in her eyes at seeing him matched his own. You did, he agreed, stamping snow from his boots. Town's talking again, about the blizzard, about you, about how you've lasted longer than anyone expected. He removed his coat, hanging it by the fire to dry. Old man Jenkins has lost $5 already. He bet you'd be gone by Christmas. Nora laughed, the sound filling the small cabin with warmth. And what about you? Did you place any bets? Keith's expression grew serious. I never doubted you'd stay, Nora. The Christmas gathering at the town church was the first time many in Silver Creek had seen Nora in her element. She wore a deep green dress that brought out the color of her eyes, her hair arranged more elaborately than her daily practical style. Keith couldn't take his eyes off her as she moved through the crowd, greeted warmly by those who had once whispered behind her back. You've won them over, he said when they finally had a moment alone near the punch bowl. Not all of them, she replied, nodding toward a group of older men still watching her with skeptical eyes. Some still think I'll run back east at the first real hardship. Let them think what they want, Keith said. You know the truth, she smiled up at him. Yes, I do. As they walked home under the stars, snow crunching beneath their boots, Keith offered Nora his arm. She took it, and they moved in comfortable silence until reaching her cabin. I have something for you, Keith said as they stood on her porch. Oh, Nora watched as he pulled a small package from his coat pocket. It's not much, he said, suddenly uncertain as he handed it to her. Nora unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden box beautifully carved with delicate wildflowers. Keith, it's beautiful. Open it, he urged. Inside was a silver locket, simple but elegant. Nora gasped softly. It was my mother's, Keith explained. I thought you might like it. Nora lifted the locket, opening it to find it empty. It's perfect, but Keith, this is too precious a gift. Not for you, he said simply. She met his gaze, and in the moonlight reflected off the snow, something unspoken passed between them. Help me put it on, she asked, turning so he could fasten the chain around her neck. His fingers brushed the nape of her neck, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. When she turned back to face him, they stood closer than before. Nora, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I need to tell you something. Yes, her eyes searched his face. I'm in love with you. The words came out plain and honest, like everything about Keith Sawyer. Have been for months now, Nora's breath caught. Keith, you don't have to say anything, he interrupted. I just needed you to know, I've watched you build a life here, seen how strong you are. I admire everything about you, and she silenced him by reaching up to touch his face. I love you too, Keith Sawyer. His smile was slow and wondering. You do? Yes, she said simply. I do. He leaned down then, his lips meeting hers in a gentle kiss that deepened as she responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Keith pressed his forehead to hers. I never thought I'd find someone like you, he murmured. Nor I you, she replied. January brought illness to Silver Creek. Influenza swept through the town, leaving few families untouched. Nora worked tirelessly, moving from home to home, treating the sick with her limited supplies and boundless determination. Keith worried as he watched her push herself to exhaustion, but he knew better than to suggest she slow down. Instead, he supported her however he could, driving her to distant homesteads, ensuring she ate and rested when possible, and stepping in to help with patient care when an extra pair of hands was needed. You'll make yourself sick, he cautioned one evening as he found her dozing at her table, medical notes spread before her. I'm being careful, she insisted, but allowed him to guide her to her bed for a few hours' rest. The crisis eventually passed, with fewer deaths than might have been expected thanks largely to Nora's efforts. The town's gratitude manifested in gifts of food, offers of help with spring planting, and most significantly acceptance. Reverend Simmons asked if you'd consider organizing a proper clinic, Keith mentioned as they walked along the creek one crisp February afternoon. Said the church could spare that back room. Really? Nora's eyes widened. That would be wonderful. I've been thinking about how to better serve everyone, especially with spring coming. Speaking of spring, Keith said, stopping to face her, I've been thinking about our future. Have you? Nora's cheeks flushed, and not just from the cold. My ranch is doing well. The house is bigger than your cabin, 4 rooms, and I built it myself. He took her gloved hands in his. It's a good house, Nora, but it needs something. What's that? She asked, though the look in her eyes suggested she already knew. You, he said simply. It needs you, I need you. Will you marry me, Nora Blackburn? Her smile bloomed slow and beautiful. Yes, Keith Sawyer, I will marry you. Their wedding in April was a town affair. The church overflowed with people who had come to respect the Eastern lady who had proven them all wrong. Nora wore a dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair and Keith's mother's locket around her neck. Keith couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him down the short aisle. Didn't think she'd last 6 months, old Jenkins muttered to his wife from their pew. Now look at her. Some women aren't meant for staying, his wife replied, but that one she found her place. After the ceremony, as the town celebrated with food and dancing in the spring sunshine, Sheriff Thompson raised a glass. To the bride and groom, he called. Though I recall many of you saying she'd never stay. He winked at Nora. Keith pulled his new wife close. They said you'd never stay, he murmured in her ear, but I knew better. Did you now? She teased. From the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach, he kissed her temple. And even if you had wanted to leave, I'd have found a way to go with you. Would you have left your ranch? She asked, surprised. For you? Yes. His eyes held hers, serious and sincere. When they said you'd never stay, I made myself a promise that if you ever needed to go, I'd stay beside you. Wherever that might be, tears shimmered in Nora's eyes. Keith Sawyer, you are a remarkable man. No more remarkable than the woman who built a life where everyone said she couldn't. He kissed her then, not caring who saw, but I'm mighty glad you chose to stay. So am I, she whispered against his lips. The years that followed proved the wisdom of their union. Keith's ranch prospered, and Nora's clinic became an essential part of Silver Creek. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl who grew up learning both ranching from their father and medicine from their mother. When hard times came, as they inevitably did on the frontier, drought years, harsh winters, the occasional outbreak of disease, Keith and Nora faced them together. Their strength as a couple became legendary in the region. a story told to encourage young couples facing their own challenges. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the town of Silver Creek, now grown into a proper small city with a railroad station and even a small hospital where Nora served as head nurse, held a celebration in their honor. "Remember when you first came to town?" Keith asked as they swayed together to the music, older now but still very much in love. "Everyone betting on when you'd leave?" "I remember," Nora said, her head resting on his shoulder. "And I remember a handsome cowboy who helped me with my trunks and then proceeded to change my life." "You changed mine more," he insisted. "Perhaps we changed each other," she suggested. Later that night, as they sat on the porch of the home they'd shared for a quarter-century, watching the stars come out over the land they both loved, Nora took Keith's hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" he asked, running his thumb over her wedding ring. "For believing I would stay when no one else did." She leaned against him, comfortable in the familiar contours of his body beside hers. "For being willing to follow me if I couldn't, I meant it," he said. "I still do. Though I'm mighty glad we stayed right here." "As am I," she agreed. "It turns out home isn't a place, Keith, it's a person, and you've been my home since the day we met." He kissed her then, the gesture as full of love and promise as it had been on their wedding day. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, witnesses to a love that had defied expectations and flourished in the challenging soil of the Wyoming frontier. They had built something rare and precious, a partnership of equals, a love strong enough to weather any storm. And though the town had once whispered that she'd never stay, Nora Blackburn Sawyer had not only stayed but thrived, with the man who had promised to remain by her side no matter what. In the end, they had both kept their promises, creating a legacy of love and service that would live on long after them in the town that had become their home and in the hearts of all who knew their story.